If you've been scrolling through endless listings, watching demo videos, and still feel that uneasy tug of, what if I pick the wrong labeler? You're not alone. The truth is, a label applicator that looks perfect on paper can end up being a frustrating sidekick in a real workshop if it doesn't match the way you actually work. That's why today's deep dive is all about cutting through the hype and figuring out whether the Primera AP380 is the machine that will actually save you time, or just another piece of equipment gathering dust. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's set the scene. Imagine you run a small batch kombucha brand, a homebrew operation, or maybe you're a DIY cosmetics creator churning out 300-odd bottles a week. You need each bottle to look professional, you need the labels to sit straight, and you need to get through the night shift without constantly stopping to slap a label on by hand. The AP380 promises to handle cylindrical and even some tapered containers, cranking out up to 1,500 units an hour. In theory, that sounds like a game changer, especially when you compare it to the tedious manual process that can chew up half a day for the same volume. So, who actually benefits from this speed? If you're consistently labeling in the hundreds per batch, the time saved adds up quickly. A small commercial kitchen that runs 3 shifts a day could shave off a full hour of labor, translating into lower labor costs and more consistent output. For a hobbyist who only does a few dozen bottles a month, that same speed is overkill. The machine's semi-automatic nature still requires you to feed each container, so the real bottleneck becomes how fast you can load the feed tray. In practice, that means you'll see the biggest gains when you have a steady stream of bottles ready to go, like on a conveyor or a simple gravity feed rack. The setup is genuinely quick, which is a relief if you've ever wrestled with a labeler that needs hours of calibration. Within 10 minutes, you can attach the label roll, thread the liner through the built-in rewinder, and you're ready to roll. The rewinder does a nice job of keeping the waste liner tidy, which is a small but pleasant detail, no more tangled strips fluttering around the workbench. The LED counter is another practical touch. You can set it to count up to 9 different front-to-back offsets. That's useful if you ever need to shift a label slightly for a new bottle shape without remeasuring each time. Now, the strengths are clear. Quick start, tidy liner management, and that counter memory that spares you from re-entering settings on each run. The machine also applies 1 or 2 labels per container, which is handy if you run a double-label system. Think brand logo plus ingredient list. For businesses that need that level of detail, the AP380 actually handles it without a hitch. The accuracy is respectable. The labels sit flat and stay aligned even on slightly tapered bottles, something many lower-priced models struggle with. But the weaknesses are equally important. The first is the semi-automatic label feed. You still have to manually place each bottle on the feed platform, and the machine doesn't have a true conveyor belt or a spring-loaded feed that pulls bottles in automatically. This means that once you hit a rhythm, any hiccup like a bottle wobbling or a label roll slipping forces you to pause and realign. In a high-volume setting, those microstops can add up and erode the promised 500 bottle per hour ceiling. Second, the AP380 is optimized for standard label rolls. If you're using custom-shaped or unusually thick labels, you may encounter feed issues. The machine's tension system isn't as forgiving as higher-end models, so you'll need to stick with the label specs the manufacturer recommends. That limits flexibility if you ever want to experiment with premium embossed labels or unusually wide graphics. A third, more subtle point, the built-in memory holds up to 9 offset settings, but there's no easy way to recall them beyond the on-screen numbers. If you frequently switch between different bottle sizes, you'll find yourself manually re-entering the offset each time you change a roll. It's not a deal-breaker, but it does add a step that seasoned labelers might find annoying. Let's talk about value. The AP380 sits in the mid-range price bracket for label applicators. With a rating of 2.7 stars out of 5 based on 13 reviews, it's clear that some users have run into frustrations, though the reviews themselves aren't broken out. The score hints that the product isn't universally loved. If you weigh the cost against the time saved, the math works out well for a small production line that can keep the feed steady. For a casual crafter, however, the purchase price may not be justified when a simple hand-labeling method or a lower-priced manual dispenser could suffice. Who should definitely consider the AP380? Small manufacturers who label 200-plus containers per day, who need both single and double label capability, and who have a stable bottle feed system like a small gravity.